paranormal that cannot be explained by scientific methods.
Told of a creature that was 6.5 to 7 feet tall.
The CIA ran secret mind control experiments.
It's a tale of a creature that's been seen by many, but believed by few.
And experts say there have been reported sightings of paranormal activity.
And there was this creature and it ran down this hill.
They say something was flying over their house and they have no idea what it was.
How the world's most powerful individuals are actually shape-shifting reptilians.
My scariest ghost hunting experience.
Jason and JV.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Can't handle the truth. Who would it now?
Beyond Reality Radio.
It's Monday on the West Coast, Tuesday on the East Coast. Many of you are stuck somewhere in between. Welcome to Beyond Reality Radio with myself, Jason Hawes, and the always awesome JV Johnson.
This is the day we get to start a new week out. Fresh off the weekend.
Week out. I was thinking you said workout, and I was like, I was a little lost there.
No, it's a Monday night, and we get to start a whole new week of programs. And we got some great stuff coming up this week, by the way.
It's a Tuesday.
Well, it's a Tuesday morning.
Depends on where you are in the country.
It does. It's one of those gray areas that we get into all the time. But, remember when we were first doing this with our syndicator, Westwood One, and we were both confused about the day. And
were we starting Sunday at midnight or was it Monday? Yeah, so it was really confusing.
Yeah, it really is confusing. And I think, if I were to be a technical person about this, I would say midnight, 12 o'clock is still part of the previous day. It's not till you go to 0001 or in 1 second that it actually becomes the next day. That's my theory. All right, so I'm going to stick to that.
Okay,
what do you
we'll
think?
Run with it. I'll support you. Right or wrong, I'll support
Thanks, buddy. Welcome to the program, everybody. It's Beyond Reality Radio, of course. Tonight we're going to talk UFOs with Kevin Randle. He's a PhD, also a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. And we're going to be talking about the Socorro UFO landing of 1964. One of the things that makes this particular story so unique is that a police officer was the major witness. A very well-respected, reputable police officer. A lot of sightings. People call into the question the character of the person who reports it. This guy was pretty rock solid, and his report was pretty detailed. There are some corroborating witnesses also, and it stood up to a lot of scrutiny. It's still, there's still no irrefutable proof. However, this is one of the best documented cases of a UFO landing that is on the record books.
Well, and this was 17 years after Roswell. After the Roswell incident.
Yeah, that's right. And it was in New Mexico as well. Socorro is in New Mexico. And Kevin Randle, our guest tonight, is actually an expert on Roswell as well. So we'll be able to connect those two and maybe do some comparing and contrasting of those two reports.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
What? I know. I can see the excitement in your face. I can tell.
Well, I think anytime we're talking about UFOs and things, it is something that excites me. It's an interest that I've always had, and I've never had the ability to really get out there and investigate it because all my time has been pretty much investigating hauntings and demonic possessions and ghosts, you name it, things of that nature. So this is a topic that I've always been intrigued by, but I've never really had the chance to get out and get my hands dirty.
Yeah, that's all well and good. I was talking about the fact that today is National Chicken Dance Day, is what had you excited.
Oh, I'm always excited about that. You got to play the music, though?
You know what? I was thinking about that, but I think that might even be too hokey for this program. I don't
play it at every wedding. They play it at every father-daughter dance I ever went to.
Everyone.
It was, they always played that song.
I actually did the chicken dance.
Oh, the music. It's not really
Yeah. I actually did the chicken dance in Munich at the Hofbräuhaus to an Oompa band playing it. It was kind of fun to actually do it there. I will say there were a few big liter Hofbräuhaus beers involved to make me and my buddies do.
Yeah, they would have to be.
Yeah, but we got up on stage and did the chicken dance.
Anyways, if you haven't yet, head over to Facebook.com/Beyond Reality Radio, like the Facebook page for us. Then head to BeyondRealityRadio.com, where you can find all the stations we are on across the country. We're constantly updating the list, so check it often. You can also download the free iPhone and Android app right there, which allows you to listen live, catch past shows, join the online chat, and more. Or just listen right from the website. Just click the pop-up button in the upper right-hand corner of BeyondRealityRadio.com, and that'll open up a chat room. You can listen to the show from there, hang out with a great community of people, and it's always a good time. So make sure you check it out. If you download the show from iTunes, though, do me a favor and just rate it for us. It helps push it forward and makes it easier for people to find.
Yeah, we want people to do that. We want people to be able to find it easily and connect with us and chat with us and all that stuff. It makes the program better for all of us. We really enjoy that. A couple great things coming up during the week. Tuesday night, we've got Sarah Mendelson joining us, an animal channeler and communicator. She's also an author and a speaker, and she's written a book called We Walk Beside You. Little Black Paws Publishing is the publisher of that book, and it opens the door to the breathtaking world of the animal consciousness and wisdom of animals and what animals actually underlie life and us, what they know about us.
What they know about us.
All right, welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio with Jason and JV. Our phone number is 844-687-7669. You'll need to write that down. We'll take calls later in the program. We're going to be talking about UFOs primarily tonight with our guest, Kevin Randle. Kevin is a PhD, also a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force, and he's also an expert, one of the leading experts on ufology. He is one of the top dogs here, Jay, and we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this stuff with him tonight.
I'm excited. This should be fun.
All right, so let's bring Kevin into the program. Kevin, welcome to Beyond Reality Radio. Great to have you on tonight.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and I certainly hate to correct you at the very beginning of the program, but I was a lieutenant colonel in the Army.
Oh, yeah, I saw something about the Air Force. Did you do something in the Air Force Reserve?
Yes, I was.
That's why.
I started out active duty Army, then I went to Air Force and the Air Force Reserve, and then the Iowa National Guard. So,
okay, so
my career was bizarre.
Well, and I don't mind being corrected. I'd rather have it correct. Anyway.
Yeah, if you know us, you'd be correcting us all night. So,
so
the other thing is the Army is so much more important than the Air Force.
Ooh, you're good.
Yeah, wow.
The Army is an actual armed force.
Are you trying to generate phone calls now? Is that your objective, Kevin?
No, and offend the Air Force? Oh, no, certainly not.
Anyway, welcome to the program. We're excited about this discussion tonight. But before we get into the specifics of what we're going to talk about, the Socorro event and some other UFO-specific events, tell us about how you got to the point where any of this stuff interested you to begin with.
In the very beginning?
Yeah, let's start. Let's start early.
Oh, we go back into the 1950s, and I hesitate to say that because it hurts my heart. My mother was interested in science fiction, and she dragged me to a movie, Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Oh, yeah.
And that kind of started my interest in it. And she was a big fan of science fiction, and science fiction is about alien visitation and life on other planets and alien civilizations and all that. And it's not a great step from that into the arena of UFOs, which we're talking about interstellar flight and life on other planets and that sort of thing. So she kind of sparked that interest. And then while I was in high school, I read a book called Strangers in the Skies by my good friend Brad Steiger, who just passed away a week ago yesterday. And that kind of underscored that. And I had an opportunity to talk to Brad when I was just beginning, and I was writing a book about paranormal things. I'd come across a story about a kid who had vanished mysteriously in Wales, and I knew the secret of finding Brad Steiger at the time because he'd been born as Eugene Olson, and he admired Rod Steiger as a writer. So he changed his name. He wrote under the name Brad Steiger, but I knew he was Eugene Olson, and I knew where he lived and where he taught college. So I called directory assistance in those pre-internet days and got him on the phone, and he was just so nice and so cordial about this. Don't talk about that. That story's a hoax. I found out it's a hoax, and we kind of had a friendship for literally 40 years from that point on. So that kind of got me all riled up to do UFO research and do writing about UFOs and that sort of thing.
As you were influenced by 1950s sci-fi films, and I have to tell you, they're some of my favorite films, so I understand falling in love with them. And obviously, around that same time, events and occurrences like Roswell and the event we're going to talk about in just a little bit, the Socorro landing, these things were happening at that time. And were you aware of those at the time while you were younger and kind of paying attention to the pop culture of it versus what was happening? Did you see the headlines? Did you hear the reports at the time, or was this something that you had to learn about later?
Well, since I wasn't born in 1947 when Roswell happened,
right, of course.
I didn't see the headlines.
Of course, yes. That one, of course.
But one of the things, and I didn't know it at the time, but one of the greatest headlines I've ever seen in a newspaper is in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa Gazette. And it was after the Washington National sightings in Washington, D.C., obviously, in 1952, where jet fighters intercepted the UFOs over Washington, D.C. The objects were seen on radar on 2 consecutive Saturday nights. And the headline in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, banner headline, and it's something right out of a science fiction film, it said, "Saucers swarm over Capitol." I thought, wow, what a great headline. But I of course, found that much, much later. With the Socorro sighting, I do remember that when it happened, and Walter Cronkite reporting on it on the CBS Evening News or whatever they called that program at the time, and neighbors telling me, "Did you see the story about the flying saucer in Socorro. So I heard about that one at the time as my interest developed. So when we moved beyond Socorro in 1964 into the 70s and when the sightings were headline news around the country, I was always kind of aware of what was going on and where it was happening. So the earliest stuff from the late 40s, early 50s, no. When we get into the 1960s, yeah, I was aware of what was going on.
When you became aware of these things, were you immediately a skeptic, or did you immediately develop a curiosity that made you want to pursue the truth of all this?
I was very curious about it, and I remember the very first UFO investigation I ever went on while I was still in high school. A friend of mine's mother had seen a flying saucer at some point, and she agreed to sit down and talk to me. One question I wanted to answer, the only question I really had for her, was it a fuzzy object in the distance, or was it something that was clearly and sharply defined? Because at the time we were hearing about, well, when people see UFOs, they only see these blobs of lights in the distance or these fuzzy objects that they can't really make out. So my question to her, what did it look like? Was it a sharply distinguished object? And she said that it had been hovering over their barn at about 200 feet above it and was very sharply defined, and it was very large, and she got a very good look at it for a number of minutes. And that was the one thing that I wanted to know, and it kind of spun off from there. And I had a friend in high school who was also very interested in UFOs, and we started a flying saucer or UFO investigative organization, and we drew our name out of a science fiction movie. We used the Office of Scientific Investigation, which had appeared in a couple of the old science fiction films, and so we had letterhead paper and all of that stuff. So we were doing investigations as the Office of Scientific Investigation until we graduated from high school, and I ended up in the U.S. of A. Army, and he went off to college. So kind of ended our investigations together, but I still maintain my interest in UFOs from that point on.
Now, when it comes down to investigating UFO reports, I mean, it's got to be a little tough because all it is you're going on interviewing people and asking what they experienced, what they saw, and so forth. It's not like you're able to actually get out there and locate something at that time, correct?
Well, when you say locate something, if you're talking about the object that they've seen, no, we are always late getting there. But like in a murder mystery, and I hesitate to use the term murder mystery or a robbery, there's evidence left behind occasionally. Sometimes there's photographs, sometimes there's landing traces that are left behind. Sometimes there's radar tracks, sometimes there's photographs, so that there are things that can be analyzed. I think it was Ted Phillips, who is known for his investigation of UFO landing sites. And he was saying that if you describe the object to him, he could tell you what the landing traces would look like, or vice versa. If he saw the landing traces, he could tell you what kind of object you saw. So there was some correlation between the landing traces and the objects, which you wouldn't see if it was something really haphazard and unreal or imaginary. So there are things like that can be analyzed. What we do not have, and it's really kind of bothered me for quite a long time, is a number of photographs taken from different locations of the same object at the same time by independent observers. And if we had something like that, then we can get all kinds of measurements and all kinds of information from it. What we have is somebody will take like a series of photographs, and in today's environment with computers and all of that, we have every 10-year-old kid in the world investigating or inventing their UFO photographs, and it becomes very problematic in determining what was seen and what was real and what was not. But there are a number of very good physical evidence cases where there were landing traces left behind, and Socorro being one of them. There's some very good photographic cases. But the other problem that we're running into, and as an investigator, it's not really a problem, but we're solving some of the old classic cases where it seemed that they were inexplicable at the time they were reported, but as we've learned more about the environment around us, or we've had an opportunity to see more of what's going on and learn other things, we've been able to identify some of these. And one of the ones that I think of in that case is the Charles Whitted sighting from 1948. And these were two airline pilots who saw what they thought was an Army jet coming at them. And at the time, it was the Army Air Forces as opposed to the United States Air Force coming at them in a bright light, and it went by them, and they thought they'd seen a cigar-shaped craft with square windows on it.
Well, hold on, and we'll get more into that. We got to take a quick break, but a lot more to come. You're listening to Jason and JV on Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
Welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. There's no coincidence we're playing a theme from one of the James Bond movies tonight, just because talking about UFOs always reminds me of government agents and conspiracies and secrets and special agents.
What? Government and secrets? What
Yeah,
are you
right?
talking
Right.
about?
Is that a paradox, an oxymoron?
I mean, come on. They would never keep anything like that from us.
We are talking with Kevin Randle tonight. Kevin Randle's a retired lieutenant colonel. He's also a PhD and an author. I mean, a prolific author. Kevin, you've written something like 120 plus books, somewhere in that neighborhood, right?
Yes, I have, but they all haven't been on UFOs.
Right, and you've got 28 or so that are UFOs and or paranormal topics.
Yes, in fact, when I was at a MUFON convention in Denver a couple of years ago, some guy came up to me and says, "You know, you've written more UFO books than anybody." And I immediately said, "No, I think it's Brad Steiger." And so Brad and I used to laugh about that, who was ahead in the race. But I think Nick Redfern is catching up with, well, now he's going to be able to catch Brad, but I'm going to have to get busy again to stay ahead of.
You've got some work to do, Kevin. But I think all the work you've done has been fantastic. Now we interrupted you to go to break here, so why don't you go ahead and pick up the story where you left it? And once you're done with that, we're going to open up the door to this Socorro discussion.
Okay, but I would like to say one thing before we do that. Wouldn't
Sure.
a more appropriate theme, James Bond theme, be Moonraker since they were out in space?
That's a great point. That would have been the one to do. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Anyway. We were talking about the Charles Whitted sighting and what they had seen back in 1947, a cigar-shaped craft with square windows on it. In March of 1968, one of the Russian rockets or satellites fell back to Earth, and it was seen all over the United States. And what was interesting is a number of people saw what they thought was a cigar-shaped craft with square windows along it, which suggests that something breaking up in the sky like that could give the impression of a lighted cockpit and square windows. Looking at videos on YouTube, and there was something called Meteor Compilation. I think it was like 3 minutes and 15 seconds or something like that. It was a compilation of meteors falling, and you would see how, as the object broke up, you begin to get this idea that it's a cigar-shaped craft with windows along the side and maybe a very brightly lighted cockpit. And so I think the point simply was that our knowledge of what the meteors, the bolides look like, the very bright meteors look like, and that sort of thing, shows how the mind can, I guess, fill in details around it and give you an impression of a cigar-shaped craft when it was something that was really breaking up in the sky. So, yeah, that's kind of what my point was. We were learning some things. We've been able to solve some of the older cases. But when we move to Socorro, notice that nice segue there?
Very nice.
Move to Socorro, we've got an object on the ground, and even though we've had 50 years to research it, we still haven't come up with a solid explanation for what was seen.
So let's, for a lot of listeners that may not be familiar with this incident, there are a lot of people who follow the UFO sightings and reports pretty closely, but there are a lot that don't. So why don't you give us the nuts and bolts of what this particular sighting, report, and incident was?
Well, I think this one's so important everybody would know it, and I wouldn't need to do that. And they would have read my book by now. But assuming that isn't true, and unfortunately I think that's probably not true, what we have is an event that took place on April 24th, 1964. Lonnie Zamora is a policeman in Socorro, New Mexico. It's on the highway between Albuquerque and El Paso. And he's chasing a speeder through town around 6 o'clock at night. He hears something off in the distance, and he thinks a dynamite shack, a storage shed for dynamite, had exploded. So he breaks off the chase, and he goes toward this dynamite shack, and he's climbing up a couple of hills and like that. And down in this arroyo, he sees this object that he thinks at first is an overturned car. So he starts down there to see if he could help. And it turns out that it's a craft of some kind, of white craft on 4 legs. He stops, he gets out of the car, he sees 2 beings near it. They turn and look at him and then scurry around the back, and the thing lifts off in the sky and disappears in the distance. Sighting lasts 2.5 minutes, maybe, something like that. The beings are in sight less than a minute. So we've got a police officer who is doing one thing and comes across this object on the ground. Immediately, he alerts the headquarters, police headquarters. I'm going to say the sheriff's office, but the police headquarters. one of his good friends, who happened to be a state policeman, comes out there immediately and sees the landing gear impressions and sees this bush and some scrub brush around. There's desert-type grasses around that are smoking, that have obviously been subjected to high heat. So he sees the physical evidence right after the object disappears, and there's some discussion of whether or not it was still in the sky when he got there or not. He always denied that he never saw anything, but there's been some discussion that he may actually have seen it way in the distance. The FBI gets involved that night. The Army gets involved, and I say the Army, the White Sands Missile Range, which is near Alamogordo, New Mexico. The testing range goes all the way up close to Socorro, and there's an Army officer whose duty station at White Sands is much closer to Socorro than it is Alamogordo. He's called in, and the FBI agent, the Army officer, and some of Lonnie Zamora's pals questioned him about what he'd seen and made reports that night. So we've got some very nice documentation that went on with the sighting. The important point, he's seen an object on the ground, he's seen it lift off, he's seen apparently two beings from inside the craft, outside it. It's one of the very few cases in the Project Blue Book files that is a report with occupants involved that's labeled unidentified, because their attitude was that if you see the creatures from inside, well, you obviously have some kind of problems with delusions or you're mentally unstable in some fashion. They would write it off as psychological problems. This is one of the few that they didn't do that on. So it's an important case for that reason, if nothing else.
And you said that the whole incident for Lonnie Zamora lasted about 2.5 minutes from the point where he first saw the craft to the craft taking off and disappearing?
It was a very short time that it was on the ground, a very short time that he observed it. A lot of UFO sightings last a matter of seconds, and you wonder what kind of perceptions the people get from that short of an observation. But he was close enough that he got a very good look at it. He was within 30 or 40 yards of the thing on the ground, so he got a very good look at it. He got a look at the occupants, the creatures from inside, so he got a very good look at it on the ground, and he got a good look at it as it took off.
And what did he say the occupants actually looked like? I know there's been references to them being in white uniform type outfits.
White coveralls is what happened. In both Captain Richard Holder, who was the the Army officer who was there, and Arthur Burns, who was the FBI guy, when they talked to Zamora, they suggested maybe you better not mention the beings. Not because they were trying to suppress the information, but they were afraid of the reaction of the public and the news media if it got out that he was claiming to see alien creatures. There was also a symbol on the side of the craft, and Captain Holder says maybe we should not talk about that too much, because that way if there's other people who report the same craft and they can't draw the same symbol you saw, then we know we've got a copycat here, something like that. So they were withholding the information not to suppress it, but what I think are very good reasons. And I know Jim and Coral Lorenzen from the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, who were there within 48 hours, agreed with Holder and Burns on what they had done. So it wasn't something that the military or the FBI had done or the government had done that wasn't approved by the civilian organizations involved. The descriptions that he gave, that Zamora gave, were always very vague about it. He talked about the two white coveralls, humanoid-type creatures, 2 arms, 2 legs, didn't seem to see any headgear, became very vague about what he had seen, and I think part of that was the reaction once that information got out from the news media, but also what the FBI agent had suggested to him.
Well, and about how far was it estimated that he was from these beings and the craft?
He got as close as about 30 yards to him, so he was very close to him. And there was another controversy about him losing his glasses, and he needed his glasses to see well. But what happened was after the beings went back into the craft, there was a roar, and Lonnie Zamora thought the thing was going to blow up. And he took off running, and it bumped into the side of his car, knocked his glasses off, and hit the ground, and covered his head to protect his head during the explosion. He had been in Korea during the Korean War, obviously, and had remained a member of the New Mexico National Guard until he retired. So he had military experience, both combat and in peacetime, but he was worried about the thing blowing up. So he got very close. He had his glasses on for the vast majority, well, until the sighting ended. So he got a very good look at everything that was going on down in that arroyo.
So with 30 yards, so we're looking at about 90 feet. Now, was he able to make out any facial definition, or what they look like?
He did not talk about any facial features or anything like that. He was always very vague about what he said. Now, there are some people in New Mexico, Socorro, New Mexico, who were friends of his, and he may have shared more information with them than he did with UFO investigators, newspaper reporters, and all of that sort of thing. I have a friend, Robert Cornett, and he and I had worked together on a number of UFO sightings. In fact, we have been the first two civilians to actually see the Project Blue Book files when they were declassified back in 1976. He had gone to Socorro to visit the Very Large Array, which is the radio telescope display out west of Socorro. You've seen it in the movie Contact. That's where they filmed part of the Contact. And while he was in Socorro on a lark, he called Zamora up. And Zamora said, well, we're having a barbecue. Come on down, but we're not going to talk about the flying saucer. So Bob went and had barbecue with Lonnie and Zamora, but they didn't talk about the flying saucer. So he was very reticent to talk about it unless he knew you very well. There's a fellow in Socorro I've talked to a couple of times who said that not long before Lonnie Zamora died, they went out on kind of a trip to the arroyo and where things happened and all that, and he got good descriptions of what was going on, but he felt that that was information that Lonnie was sharing with him privately and really didn't want to talk about it. So Lonnie was always very cautious and careful about what he said, and I think part of it was a response to the news media. And Bill Brazel, if you remember, Bill Brazel is the guy who picked up some of the debris from the Roswell crash. And he told me, as we were talking about it, that he would periodically get phone calls like at 3 o'clock in the morning from drunks in bars wanting to quiz him about what he had seen and tell him what he'd really seen and that sort of thing. And I think Lonnie Zamora had similar experiences. And I know that I think his family said he got about 1,500 letters from around the world right after this happened, and then he would periodically get more correspondence and phone calls as time went on, but they were much less frequent.
One more quick question before we have to go to break here, Kevin. You mentioned it was about a 2.5 minute encounter, and you said it wasn't a very long time. And I know that you said that in context of just what people might think is a long time. But as far as UFO sightings and contact, that is a pretty long time. And do we have any sense of what Lonnie Zamora did during those 2.5 minutes? Did he stare and wonder? Did he try to approach? Did he draw his gun? Did he hide in a bush and kind of peer around? I mean, what was his reaction for those 2.5 minutes? Do we know?
I would like to say one thing: there weren't a lot of big bushes for him to hide in behind, given the terrain. But he saw it first as he came over the crest of a ridge line. He went down, dipped down again, lost sight of the craft, came up on another hill, and stopped his car. Got out of the car and started down to approach it. So he got out of the car. He went to approach the object. The two beings rushed around back behind. There was kind of a bang when it closed up its machine, and then when it began to roar, he hit the dirt, and then the thing disappeared. One of the things he did very quickly after the sighting, right after the sighting, there was a symbol on the side of the object, and he drew on a scrap of paper what that symbol looked like, and that piece of paper actually survived in the Project Blue Book file. So we have a very good, accurate description of what the symbol was like based on what Lonnie Zamora saw, and he signed that before he turned it over to the military.
Interesting. All right, we're talking with Kevin Randle about the Socorro UFO incident. We're going to continue that discussion on the other side of the break, and we will open up your phone calls in the next hour at 844-687-7669.
A lot more to come. You're listening to Jason and JV, Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be right back.
Finally I figured out, but it took a long, long time. Now there's a turnabout, maybe because I'm trying. There's been time, I'm so confused. All my road leads you
All right, welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio with Jason and JV. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to all the great radio stations carrying the program around the country. We appreciate them joining the list of affiliates and making the show even better. I mean, it's a lot of great stations. We love that.
And that list is constantly growing, and we greatly appreciate that. And the whole reason the show's success is because of all of you tune in, and we know that, and we owe a big thank you to all of you.
We do. And tonight we're talking with Kevin Randle. Kevin, this is a particularly short segment. We only have a couple minutes, and I don't know if it's long enough, but maybe we can start the discussion. Tell us about Lonnie Zamora as an individual, what his reputation was like as a police officer. Was he a credible guy? Was he a respected guy? Obviously, that makes a difference when somebody is reporting an incident like this.
Well, in kind of a backhanded or left-handed compliment, he wasn't the brightest guy in the world, which suggests he wouldn't be competent enough to create any kind of hoax with landing gear traces and all of that sort of thing. So in that respect, it suggests what he saw was real. He was respected as a police officer, although I understand that the younger people in Socorro, the college students, the high school students, didn't like him because he would give them speeding tickets. And I don't know why you would blame the policeman. You were speeding, you deserve the ticket.
Because it's everybody else's fault.
But he was respected. He was a police officer. I believe it was 15 years after the event, he finally retired from the police force. He got another city job. He had been a member of the New Mexico National Guard, and he served there. Everybody who knew him seemed to respect him as a credible, solid citizen. One of the first things he did after the sighting was he wanted to talk to a priest because he thought he'd seen something demonic. He thought he'd seen something frightening in that respect, and he was a very religious man, which would suggest he wouldn't be part of a prank. I know Philip Glass, the great debunker, had suggested at one point that Lonnie Zamora and the mayor of Socorro had concocted this story to create a tourist attraction in Socorro so that the mayor's land that was on the site where it supposedly landed would become more valuable. Turns out the mayor didn't own the land, and Philip Glass was wrong on that point. But he was a respected individual in New Mexico, and a credible individual, and people would say that if he told you something, you could believe it as being true. Doesn't mean he reported precisely what he'd seen, meaning, its interpretations, his perceptions of it, but he tried to accurately describe what he had seen and provided drawings for the military and UFO organizations about what he had seen.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to take a break, and we got a lot more to come. The phone number is 844-687-7669. Again, toll free at 844-687-7669. You listen to Jason and JV Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
She sits alone, an empty stare on mother's face she wears. Where did she go wrong? The fight is gone. Lord, help this broken home. Hey!
paranormal that cannot be explained by scientific methods.
Told of a creature that was 6.5 to 7 feet tall.
The CIA ran secret mind control experiments.
It's a tale of a creature that's been seen by many, but believed by few.
And experts say there have been reported sightings of paranormal activity.
And there was this creature, and it ran down this hill.
They say something was flying over their house, and they have no idea what it was.
How the world's most powerful individuals are actually shape-shifting reptilians.
My scariest ghost hunting experience.
Jason and JV.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Beyond reality radio.
It's Monday on the West Coast, Tuesday on the East Coast, and many of you out there are stuck somewhere in between. Welcome to Beyond Reality Radio with myself, Jason Hawes, and the always awesome JV Johnson.
You know what we forgot to do? We forgot to wish all the mothers who listen to the program a happy Mother's Day. Of course, we weren't on the air on Sunday, so we couldn't do it then, but happy Mother's Day to all the moms.
Yes, definitely a big happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. It's for everything you do, and God, I wish my mom, because she's kept me alive this long. She's allowed me to live this long.
Yes, she deserves a lot of credit.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to bring up too is it's been floating around in the internet, obviously, and I think we posted it on the Beyond Reality Radio Facebook page. Did you see the picture that was caught on the security camera? The man claims he thinks it was an angel.
You know, I saw a post. I really haven't been on Facebook at all today, but I'll have to check that out.
It's a fairly compelling picture. Now, my problem with these security cameras, it's one of those cameras that takes stills. It's not a video camera.
Yeah.
And it's motion sensitive or motion activated. And part of the problem is when you get any kind of flying creature, let's say a moth, and it's really close to the lens, so the perspective is off because you see a truck in the background, and it's flapping its wings. And those, the shutter speed on those cameras is not particularly fast because it's nighttime shooting in this case. So it can be blurred. It's hard to really determine exactly what it is. But I'll tell you, it is if it's not a Photoshopped picture, which I don't know because I haven't examined it that closely. Let's assume it's not for a second. It's still pretty compelling. It's worth taking a look at. It's pretty cool.
I'm looking at it right now. It's interesting. But I always get worried when they say we caught an angel or we caught a demon or something, especially in this day and age where right down to all these phone apps where people can create a ghost standing in a room next to them. I mean, it's just, you got to really question everything you see.
Yeah, you have to be skeptical, and you've got to look at it pretty carefully before you can make any determination. And even with that, unless you have an expert that's really picking it apart, it's very, very difficult to tell because there are so many ways to forge something like that these days.
Yeah, and if I don't know if you heard, but Margaret Kidder
Margot Kidder. That's right. I was going to mention
Lois
that too.
Lane.
That's it. Not only Lois Lane, but my favorite role of hers was in the Amityville Horror.
That's right.
In 1978 that film came out. I think it was. Maybe
James Brolin too, right?
Yeah, James Brolin. One of the best horror movies, and of course the one that started it all after the book was written, and a pretty cool movie. But yeah, Margot Kidder. She was only 69, I think it was. And she was scheduled to be at Scaricon a couple times, and she actually ended up canceling both appearances.
I remember that. I know she was dealing with bipolar disorder and a bunch of other issues. Who knows what happened, but definitely rest in peace. I mean,
of course.
The best goes out to her
and I know
her
this,
entire family.
I just have to say this because it makes me chuckle a little bit, not to bring politics into this at all, but she was scheduled to appear at Scaricon the year of the presidential election. So that wasn't last year, it was the year before, right? It was,
yep.
Okay. And she ended up canceling her appearance because she needed to be in Wyoming or Montana. I think it was Montana because Bernie Sanders was coming, and she was the chairman of the Bernie Sanders campaign for Montana or something like that. So she had to be there for it and couldn't come to the Scaricon event that she had contracted to come for. anyway, whatever. I just thought it was kind of funny. That's all. All right, so we're not talking about this tonight. We're actually talking about UFOs, specifically the Socorro UFO landing incident with our guest, Kevin Randle. By the way, Kevin's website is Kevin Randle. It's just like it sounds, .blogspot.com. You can go there. And Kevin, it's kind of an opportunity. That website is kind of a place where you offer just kind of things you're thinking about, right?
Yes, I have to have some kind of motivation to put a posting up, but it's also visited by a lot of people on both sides of the question. Skeptics visit there and true believers visit there, so we get some interesting discussions. And we've been doing one with the Coin helicopter sighting from 1973. The helicopter saw the object approach them, hover overhead, and take off, and there was some interesting stuff going on. And we've been having a long discussion about that in the last few days about that, which is kind of compelling and interesting. But and it's not just UFOs. I've done some stuff on the Oak Island excavations going on with a big treasure that's supposedly hidden up there, and some other things like that I find interesting myself. So it's mostly UFOs, but some other sort of esoteric things as well.
Jimmy and I are constantly talking about the Oak Island and how each episode, because we love the show, but each episode is another letdown for us.
And that's what the blog says, basically.
Really?
We get this big build-up. We found a Roman sword. Yeah, it's a duplicate they made about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Here we found a coin from 1694. It proves that people were here in 1694. And I said, no, it just proves that somebody who had a coin from 1694 was running around on the island and dropped it. Now,
that's
why is
true.
it on the surface that they find?
And a lot of people don't think about that. I mean, often I'll reach into my pocket and I'll have a penny from 1960 or something. So it doesn't mean that it's so. Yeah, I totally understand that.
One of the questions I kind of explored on the blog is, what was the coinage circulation back in that time frame? I mean, I've got a $50 from 1855. So, I was trying to figure out, were the coinage, was it circulated well like that back in those days, like we have today, or was it kind of in circulation for a year or two and then it disappeared, or what exactly was? And I also found out that one of the things is some of the coins are, they're dated like 1694, but they were minted many, many years later, and it was based on the original design, the original date. And I actually found an archaeological paper, or an anthropological paper, that did a little bit of explanation about how if you found a coin associated with something, you couldn't really date it from the date on the coin. I looked at all of that stuff. So that was one of the things I'd done, and I would recap. If they really annoyed me in an episode, I'd recap it and explain, this is why I'm annoyed about this episode. But you're absolutely right. They would big build up. We're going to find this, and for the last season, it was, we found the money pit, and all they were saying was, we found where the original excavation was. We didn't find any treasure at the bottom of it. So it was always kind of a disappointment for me.
All right, you got to move on because you're rehashing things and getting me all worked up.
I need to ask,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that.
No.
And I need to ask one more question about Oak Island before we move on to this topic. Do you think there's something there, Kevin?
No.
Okay.
I think if there was something there, it's long gone, and I'm not sure there was ever anything there.
Do you think the original reports of what was discovered there with the planks every 10 feet, that whole thing, do you think that was legitimate, or do you think that was just a hoax?
I don't think it was a hoax. I think it might have been a misidentification of what's going on. A woman named Joyce Steele did a book that talked about these kilns, or what they called ship supplies, that were built in the New World back in that time frame. And some of what was found there seems reminiscent of the kind of things they found in North Carolina and South Carolina, and it had to do with pine tar and all of this sort of thing. So I think there was something there, but I think it may have been misinterpreted. But again, on the blog, I discuss all of that at some point, and you just type Oak Island into the search engine, and it'll bring up all the articles I've done on Oak Island.
All right, Kevin. Well, I'm going to have Slick Eddie schedule you to come back on just to talk about Oak Island at some point, because that'll take a whole show by itself. Jason and I both have a real interest in it. So,
well, it'll take more than a show.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right, but let's go back to the Socorro incident. I wanted talk about other witnesses. We know that Lonnie Zamora is the key witness to this whole event, but were there anybody else that witnessed what happened?
Here's one of the really annoying things about the Socorro case. a couple of friends of mine, Ben Moss and Tony Angiola, when I had my radio program, we were talking about this, and he said that the 3 witnesses had called the police department about the thing in the sky. But before Lenny Zamora saw it, thing in the sky, the same day, minutes before. And I asked him like 3 or 4 times, did you see the police blotter? Did you see the police blotter? And I never got a satisfactory answer on that. So that kind of spurred my interest in looking at more of the information on the Socorro sighting, and I found a document written by Richard Holder. He's the captain that came out from the Army that very night, either very late on the 24th or very early on the 25th. And in that report, he says that the police dispatcher told him that 3 people had called in about something in the sky, hearing this object or seeing this object in the sky. And what really annoyed me is nobody followed up on that. They could have found these people easily because they know the trajectory of the thing. Socorro wasn't that big of a town back in that era. They could have easily knocked on some doors and probably found, if not those people who called in, but other people who had seen it. They never bothered to do that. We know there were additional witnesses because Holder documented it back in 1964 and said, this is what they called in about, but they never tried to find them. Ray Stanford, when he was down there in 1964, Ray Stanford was the NICAP guy, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena down there, and he was there not long after the sighting. He said that he had been in he was with a radio announcer, a radio broadcaster, in a restaurant, and they were talking to these 2 older women who said that they had heard the object. And I said to Ray, did you get their names? And he said, oh, yeah. And I said, well, do you know who they are? And he said, well, they'd be dead by now. And I'm thinking, yeah, but if we get a city directory or a city map, we might be able to figure out relatives, and we may be able to find somebody, even at this late date, that could help us out on that. But he didn't have the name, so I couldn't follow up on that any further. There was a fellow named Opal Grinder who owned a gas station, and I think it's more like a travel center that we think of it today. It was more than just a gas station, even back in 1964, and said a car from Colorado had stopped by to buy gas, and the driver had said something about their low-flying aircraft, and this was about the time Lonnie Zamora was involved with the sighting as well. He said it was a fellow, his wife, and 2 or 3 boys. Thought the car was a green Cadillac from Colorado. Took off down the road. He paid cash for the gas, so there was no way to follow up on that either. But, here's another lost opportunity. And finally, there was a guy who called the radio TV station in Albuquerque to talk about this. And they never found him either. Jerry Clark, in some of his investigations and talking to some of the other people in the area, found a guy, and I've got the name in the book, and the name escapes me at the moment, who had seen something a few hours later that sort of matched the description of what Lonnie Zamora said, but it was in the same area. An NCO from the military, a sergeant from the military who had seen something. So we have a couple of names, but it's associated with the timing of this thing, but it wasn't as close as those other witnesses I just talked about, whose names we didn't get. So it's one of those sad things. So there were other witnesses, and we can say, well, that's a wonderful thing, and we can also say, well, it really does us no good because we don't know who they are and we can't get their stories and talk to them about it.
All right, we got to jump into a quick break here. When we come back, I want to open up the discussion about how this particular landing incident and report compares to other such reports, including what happened at Roswell.
All right, the phone lines are open. Number's 844-687-7669. You're listening to Jason and JV, Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
So
Welcome back to the show. It's Beyond Reality Radio. Phone number is 844-687-7669. Our guest tonight is Kevin Randle. Check out his website, kevinrandle.blogspot.com. He's the author of over 100 books. 28 or so are on UFOs and paranormal topics. Kevin, this is, again, a short segment. Apologize for that. But where can people find your books most easily?
Amazon.
Of course. Yeah, it seems to be the place, right?
Kindle will have it to you in a matter of seconds. But some of the books are print-on-demand books. A book I did called Roswell in the 21st Century, which came out about a year and a half ago, is a print-on-demand book. So you can get a hard copy of it as well, but it's available on Amazon. And a lot of the books, like the Socorro book, Encounter in the Desert, those are available at the local bookstores.
So in the couple minutes we have here before the bottom of the hour break, tell us about how this particular incident, the Socorro incident, rates when compared to other high-profile landing cases and sightings.
Because of the physical evidence and the witness, it rates very highly. It's a high strangeness case, and it's got some very good physical evidence associated with it. Other cases are not quite that good because they lack one of the elements. And the Socorro case would be much better if we knew who the additional witnesses were. That would make it a much better case. There was a landing in Pittsburgh, Kansas, where they saw the occupant as well in a craft. Single witness went back to the radio station where he worked at, told him what he'd seen. They went out a few hours later and could see a depression in the grass in a field and things like that. So there was that sort of thing, but it's a single witness. And just not as credible, but it's one of the few in the Project Blue Book files that's labeled as unidentified. So normally when we have a landing trace case, we always lack some elements that makes it a really solid case. Sometimes the witnesses aren't very good. Sometimes the landing trace isn't very good. With the Socorro case, we've got a very solid witness, and we've got a very good description of what went on. So it rates very highly when it's compared to other landing trace cases.
We have about a minute here before we jump into break. When you did a lot of work on Roswell as well, and can you give us a sense of the geography here? What's the distance between Roswell and Socorro?
100 miles, 120 miles. The problem is the road system in New Mexico. There's not a straight road, a road that goes from Roswell to Socorro, and you end up on this it's probably better now, but 20 years ago it was a really crappy two-lane highway that was kind of crumbling, so you could have a good road to, I think, Carrizozo, and then from Carrizozo on to the Interstate 25 and then go up to Socorro. The road was really, really crappy. But it's, as the crows flies, maybe 120 miles, something like that.
No, it's interesting. Really close. All right, so we're going to take a break. There's a lot more to come. You're listening to Jason and JV, and our guest is Kevin Randle. Make sure you tune in. We'll be back after this.
Stay tuned for more Beyond Reality Radio.
Don't be jealous that I've been chatting online with babes all day.
It's Beyond Reality Radio with Jason Hawes and J.D. Johnson.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share some time with the audience.
If you want to know the real, whole, true story.
Jason and JD.
I have yet to discover what they really are.
Jason Hawes, J.D. Johnson. Beyond Reality Radio.
Tomorrow night, we've got Sandra Mendelson joining us. She's an animal channeler and communicator, also an author and a speaker. Her book is called We Walk Beside You. We'll talk about opening the door to the breathtaking world of animal consciousness, wisdom, and what animals understand about life and what they understand about us. I'm a little nervous about that.
Yeah, I would be if I was you. Anyways, but Wednesday we were talking with Dr. Claire Johnson, a lucid dreaming expert. We'll be talking about mindful and lucid dreaming, why dreams are important, and how to have lucid dreams. So make sure you tune in.
Yeah, great programs coming up. And we've got a great one tonight, too. Kevin Randle, a PhD, retired lieutenant colonel. Website is kevinrandle.blogspot.com. A lot of books to his credit, which you can find on Amazon. And Kevin, our time is going to run short. These shows always go so very, very quickly. So I'm going to already ask that you promise you come back on and we can talk about Oak Island. We can talk about UFOs. We can talk about anything because you can talk about anything.
Yes, I can. I'm very eloquent.
Let's talk.
But,
go
but
ahead.
I would love to come back, of course.
That's terrific. Let's talk about the insignia a little bit. Was there ever any determination? I mean, obviously, if this is an alien craft, we probably have no idea what the insignia was or what it meant. But has there been any speculation on that?
The problem is it's a single sample, and we don't have a context. We don't have any way of putting together an alien language or communication system would be, by definition, alien. And if you're trying to crack a code, the language it's in or something like that. There's clues that you can pick up. But when you're dealing with an alien language, I think the best example of this is during the Second World War with the code talkers. Here were, I think they used Hopi Indians. The Meskwakis here in Iowa were used as code talkers as well. Here's a language that it's not a code. It's a foreign language, and the Japanese were never able to break any of those codes simply because it was a foreign language, and they had nobody who could speak any of those languages. So there's no way they could decode what was being said. And I think the same thing would apply to an alien language. So we have a symbol on the craft. I call it the umbrella symbol. It was sort of an arc with an arrowhead pointing up into the arc and a line across the bottom in bright red. And I think Lonnie Zamora said it was about 2 feet by 2 feet. And he got a very good look at it. And as I say, he wrote down the symbol. The moment the craft was gone, he wrote down the symbol. And then later on that night, he drew a kind of an egg-shaped object, and he drew the symbol on it, too. So we have a good idea of what he had seen and what it looked like, but there's no way of determining what it meant.
You had referenced earlier that Lonnie may have been disliked by some of the students in the area because he would give them speeding tickets, kind of his job. But there was at one point some speculation that maybe this was a hoax perpetrated by some of those students. It seems way too elaborate for a high school prank. But was there any evidence to support that, or was that just speculation?
There was never any real evidence to support the high school end of it. There's a technical school, mining and technical school, four-year college there in Socorro, which is a fairly good school. And there supposedly was a group of students who like to play pranks on people like this. But again, there was no evidence of it. And J. Allen Hynek, who was the Air Force investigator, a consultant on UFOs, knew the president of the mining school there at the time, and they sat down and talked about it, and he said there was no way our students were involved. Later on, a guy named Colgate became the president there, and he suggested to Linus Pauling, no less, that he thought the students had created some kind of prank, but he never explained how it was done or anything like that. And there's really no solid evidence given what Lonnie Zamora saw. The burning bush that was left behind, or the smoking bush that was left behind when Sam Chavez, Lonnie Zamora's friend walked up to it and put his hand on it. It wasn't warm. It was smoking, but it wasn't warm, and there was never any evidence of the accelerants around there or how they might have set the bush on fire or anything like that. The landing gear traces were not excavated. They were pressed into the soil, so it suggested something that was very heavy had landed there and created the indentation. So the evidence that it was some kind of student hoax just really doesn't hold much water.
Well, it seems
way beyond the capability.
Yeah, and also seems as if it was a hoax, at some point one of the students involved would have come forward because, the whole, the whole payoff of a hoax like that is to say, hey, I pranked you, I hoaxed you, and you believed it. And I'm assuming nobody ever came forward and said they were part of a hoax.
No one has ever gone on the record. I have a friend, Tony Brugaglia, who's a proponent of the hoax idea, and he says, well, he's talked to a guy who said he was part of it, or he knew people who were part of it, and he was always going to get me in touch with the guy, but that's never happened. But I think the real point is there would have been evidences of the hoax there because Lonnie Zamora would have seen something. There would have been evidences of other car tracks around the area or footprints from the students setting the whole thing up. And it was supposedly the students wanted to do it to get even with Lonnie Zamora. So I think that once Zamora got all this publicity about seeing this flying saucer, the students come out and say, yeah, he's so dumb he couldn't even see a joke when it was being played on him. And because they never did that, that idea that was getting even with Lonnie Zamora just never really surfaced.
I want to move the conversation to some more general questions about what's going on in the UFO community right now, or at least the ufology community. On a whole, are sightings increasing or decreasing, staying about the same as far as what's being reported?
I think the number of sightings being reported has been increasing. But the problem is, and it's something that Carl Flock and I talked about a number of times, they don't seem to be the same kind of robust sightings we got in the 50s and the 60s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. It's back to the lights in the sky and that sort of thing. Not the really kind of robust sightings with multiple witnesses and landing traces and all of that sort of thing. Yeah, there's some of that going on, but certainly not the way it was in the past. And I think that's one of the problems. There was a series of sightings in 1973. I think it started around the end of September of 1973 and went through the first week of November, about a 6-week period in 1973, in the fall of 73. Lots of people seeing the craft on the ground, lots of people seeing occupants, all of this kind of stuff going on. Always struck me as the way we would do an investigation if we were looking at another planet and it had some kind of a sentient life form on it, gathering as much information as we could, and then going home to analyze it and putting the grad students on figuring out what was going on. But we don't really see that kind of thing in today's environment, and I don't know whether we've become more sophisticated so that we're not looking at the things the way we were in the past, or if we just don't have the visitation that we had at one time or something like that. So I think the answer is, like I said, kind of twofold. Yeah, I think there's more sightings going on. I think Peter Davenport at his UFO reporting center is logging more sightings. I think MUFON is logging more sightings, but they're pretty generic light in the sky type things. There's not really a lot of good sightings of the craft on the ground or the creatures from inside it.
Well, in this day and age where technology has really excelled, everybody's got video cameras built into their phones and everything, let alone our military technology. I'm sure that there's big reasons for these things not to be around as often as they used to be. But also, with that being said, any footage that is caught, that is put out there, really needs to be scrutinized this day and age because, like we were talking about earlier, I mean, all these phone apps and everybody being able to just create things on their phone or on their computer that aren't really there and then put it online in hopes to make a viral video, that's definitely a big issue these days, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, the capability of people to create these things is just incredible. A friend of mine, Russ Estes, created what was a really crappy-looking UFO, and he did it on purpose so it would never be considered to be true. But he created a video of an object flying around the sky near his home with all the comments on the back, oh, my God, what can that be, and that sort of thing. to show how easy it could be done. And you look at the UFO, and it's clearly something that he's made up, but he did it merely to show how easy it could be done, and with a little bit of effort, it could be a very credible video. I think some of the movie footage that was taken in the 1950s on 16-millimeter cameras, those would have been incredibly difficult to fake back in the 1950s. And there's two good films, one in Montana and one in Utah, that were taken at the time that were very good. And I don't think there's really been a good explanation for either one of those. But in today's environment, it's just so easy. And I would think, what I would like to see is video from several locations by independent photographers, which we should be able to come up with, so we can analyze the motion of the thing, the direction of the thing, the size, the altitude it was operating, and the speeds. We could gather a lot of very important information if we could get 2 or 3 videos from 2 or 3 different locations of the same object at about the same time with witnesses who didn't know one another. But that hasn't happened yet, and I'm a little bit surprised given the number of cell phones with absolutely wonderful cameras in them. We should find something like that at some point.
I think that's the most frustrating point, is that there are more cameras of high-quality capabilities walking around everywhere at this point than there ever has been, and we still can't grab something good. Hey, I want a couple quick generic questions here. There's been a lot of talk about bases, alien or UFO bases, whether they're subterranean or suboceanic. Do you believe any of that discussion, or have you looked into it at all?
Back in the 1980s, I looked into some of that. But I couldn't find any solid evidence. We've got some testimonies that are less than credible, but we've got an awful lot of people coming forward telling these sorts of stories now. In fact, according to one group of people, I actually served on Mars. We didn't really go to Iraq. Those of us who were sent into that war, we were sent to Mars to fight the war on there, and then when we came home, our minds were wiped, and we were implanted with these new memories of that sort of thing, which is absolutely ludicrous. But I want to see some good evidence. I want to see something that I can look at. Something they say, well, here is where one of the bases were, and you can go there and you can look at some of the remains of it or something like that. And we just don't have that kind of evidence available for us. We have some people who tell some wonderful stories, but they're just not credible.
And one more thing that pops into the news every now and then is the International Space Station and the video feeds coming from it, and how they mysteriously seem to cut off when an object appears or doesn't appear or whatever it happens to be. Any thoughts on that?
Don Ecker has done a lot of work on some of that stuff, especially with the shuttle program and some of the footage taken from there. NASA supposedly is completely transparent, but I understand the NASA channel, which used to be a live feed, is now delayed, so they can drop out something that becomes very mysterious. So I really don't know. I've seen some stuff that is very, very interesting, and I know the capabilities of cameras that we have, the military has, is just unbelievable as well. So we should be able to get something, and NASA should be able to produce something, but they don't seem to want to delve too deeply into the UFO field, and I think that might be they're worried about their funding getting diverted into UFO research as opposed to where they would like it to go.
I would like to take a moment just to thank you for your service, by the way. We didn't do that at the beginning of the program. I know you've served in quite a few theaters and in quite a few roles. It's impressive, and we thank you for that. What are some of the next projects you've got on your slate?
I've been working on the Coin helicopter case for the last few days because I got dragged into a dust-up on that. A fellow has offered a theory that it was a refueling aircraft that was mistaken for a UFO by the helicopter crew, and there's some problems with that, and we've been in discussions with that. I've had an opportunity to interview one of the crew members from the helicopter, and I've talked to some military people involved in refueling operations to get an idea whether the theory is plausible or not. We're kind of working on that. And I was working on a book called the Moondust Conspiracy. Moondust was a project that began in 1957, which was to recover returning space debris of foreign manufacturer, unknown origin. The unknown origin, of course, covers the UFO component. And we have learned that it transcended the end of Project Blue Book in 1969, the official Air Force investigation. In 1985, the name was compromised, which is why we can talk about moon dust, and the name was changed, and the last letter we heard about that, the new name is properly classified, so we don't know what the new project is. But as we talk about these things, we find more and more classified studies of UFOs. I just discovered something, and it'll go into the book, and I've mentioned it on my blog, called Operation Horsefly, which was another investigation run out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to send investigators, trained investigators, to study UFO sightings. And I just learned about that in the last couple of months, and I don't remember reading anything about this anywhere. It was buried in the Project Blue Book administrative files. And I'm trying to learn some more about this sort of thing. But, I mean, clearly the project existed, or an attempt to fund the project existed, and I'd like to learn more about that. So, that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Kevin, we've had several presidential administrations come and go, and frequently they float things like, we're going to release documents and we're going to release information. There's going to be disclosure. We really haven't seen anything that has changed the discussion much. Will we, do you think, anytime soon from the federal government?
I don't think so. I think the only way we're going to get disclosure is if the alien creatures land. We always say at the river entrance to the Pentagon to kind of prove their existence, but land in Washington, D.C., or maybe land in Las Vegas just for the hell of it, because that would be kind of fun. But unless they announce their presence, I don't think the government has no motivation to reveal anything that they may have. We know they have stuff hidden away, and classified documents and things like that, and we're always getting hints about that, and they're always blundering, and I mean, like we found out about moon dust because of a blunder. The State Department released a bunch of documents under FOIA to Robert Todd, and it was talking about moon dust. What is moon dust? And the sad thing there is the Project Blue Book files, which was the official study, were released publicly in 1976, and it was like 30 years later. I discovered I was working on the government UFO files book, and I was searching for a certain case on the microfilm, and the word moon dust caught my attention, and I stopped, and I found 4 cases in the Project Blue Book dial in September of 1960 that are labeled moon dust. So the name was there for us to find if we'd been looked, but we've got 12,000 sightings, and I don't know how many pages of this material to go through, and so some of that stuff just turns up later. And it's the same way I found this Operation Horsefly information.
Yeah.
Well, we're out of time, Kevin. We appreciate you joining us and sharing all of this great information with us. And like I said, we're definitely going to want to have you back at some point.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for coming and hanging out with us, Kevin. And we look forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Well, you have my telephone number, unfortunately, so you can get in touch with me.
And we'll use it. So you have a great night. Thank you.
And don't forget, the books are available on Amazon, and also check out the website, kevinrandle.blogspot.com.
All right, we're going to take a break and come back and wrap things up. You're listening to Jason and JV, Beyond Reality Radio. We'll be back after this.
She changed her mind.
All right, welcome back to the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Another great night in the books. We appreciate you joining us, whether you're listening live or as a download. We're happy you're with us.
Yeah, real quick, when you call in and you want to talk about your UFO experience, don't say you don't want to be on air anymore, please. I mean, we had a ton of calls doing that tonight.
I know.
All right, but that's going to